You're joking, right? My voice cracked as I stared at the statement on my phone. Every penny I'd spent years saving for a down payment gone, where's my money? Maria, my mother, didn't even bother looking up from her coffee. Oh, relax, Juliana. It went to something important. Important, I nearly choked. It's all gone. Where did it go? She glanced at Greg, my stepfather, who sat next to her with a smug grin, swirling his coffee like we were having a casual chat. The party, Maria said, her tone dismissive. As if she just explained where the car keys were, we needed a little extra to make it special. You used my savings to pay for your anniversary party. My hands trembled as I clutched the phone that was for my house. You had no right? Greg chuckled, finally chiming in. We your parents, he said, leaning back. We don't owe you anything. Juliana fame's share, you'll get over it. My name is Juliana, and for as long as I can remember, my mother and stepfather have treated me like a second-class citizen. In my own family, my dad died when I was 12, leaving behind not just a void in my life, but a modest inheritance he'd hoped would give me a head start in adulthood. He trusted Maria to handle it until I was old enough to use it responsibly. Instead, she treated it like a family piggy bank for years. I stayed quiet, letting little infractions slide. I didn't say much when she dipped into the fund for emergencies or used it to cover Greg's credit card debt, but this time was different. This wasn't a couple $100 here and there. It was my entire down payment, nearly $25. Thousand blown on catering decorations in some overpriced venue so they could show off to their friends. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. I'd worked so hard to save that money, working extra shifts, skipping vacations, even living in a smaller apartment just to scrape together every dollar. And now, in one selfish move, they'd taken it all away. I want it back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You're going to pay me back every cent. Maria rolled her eyes, setting her mug down with a clink. Don't be so dramatic, Juliana. It's not like you're homeless. You can always save more. It's not about that, I snapped. It's about the fact that you stole from me. That money was mine, Greg smirked clearly. Enjoying the show. Technically, it was your dad's money, and we're your parents. We're the ones who decide what's best for the family. The word family hit me like a slap for years. They'd use that word to justify everything. Everything from borrowing money without asking to dismissing my feelings whenever they crossed the line, but this wasn't family. This was theft. I'm not letting this go, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Do what you have to, Maria said with a shrug, picking up her coffee, like she hadn't just ripped my dreams away. But don't expect us to apologize. We did what was necessary. I left their house that day, shaking the air in my lungs thick with frustration. Elena, my best friend, was the first person I called. I spilled the whole story, pacing my tiny apartment. As the reality of what had happened sank in. They're unbelievable, she said, her voice full of disbelief. How could they think this is okay because they don't care, I said bitterly. They've never cared as far as they're concerned. I'm just a backup plan, something to use whenever it's convenient. What are you going to do? She asked. I didn't have an answer yet. Part of me wanted to scream at them until they understood how much they'd hurt me. Another part wanted to crawl into bed and pretend none of this was happening. But the strongest part, the part my dad raised to stand up for myself, knew exactly what needed to be done. I'm going to get my money back, I said, my voice firm, even if it means calling the police. By the time I hung up with Elena, my anger had crystallized into determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time, my parents know. Maria and Greg had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, and I was done playing the role of the dutiful daughter who kept quiet for the sake of family they stole from me. It was time to show them there were consequences. The next morning, I called the bank to confirm what I already knew. Maria had accessed my savings account using an old joint authorization she'd somehow convinced me to keep years ago, just in case she transferred every last penny out 2 weeks before the party, with no intention of telling me that's not legal, right? I asked the bank manager, my voice shaky but firm. It's a gray area, he admitted. His tone cautious since it was a joint account she technically had access, but given the circumstances, it's worth pursuing legally, especially if the funds were earmarked for you, thank you, I said, jotting down the detail. He provided I'll be in touch. My next call was to Chloe, a lawyer Elena had recommended over coffee that afternoon. I explained everything, the savings account, the stolen money, and Maria's unapologetic response. Chloe listened intently. her pen flying across a notepad as if she spoke. This isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. She said, once I finished, even with joint access, there are limits to what she can do with those funds, especially if you can prove if they were specifically intended for your use. I nodded, hope flickering to life for the first time since this nightmare began. So what's my next step first? We'll file a report with the police to establish a paper trail, she said. Then we'll draft a formal demand for repayment if they refuse. And something tells me they will. We can escalate to legal action. The thought of involving the police made my stomach turn, but when I thought about the hours I'd spent working overtime, the vacations I'd skipped, and the sacrifices I'd made to save that money, my resolve hardened. Maria and Greg thought they could walk it all over me because I was their daughter. It was time to prove them wrong. Filing the police report was both nerve-wracking and oddly liberating, sitting across from the officer. At the station, I recounted the entire story, showing him copies of the bank statement Chloe had helped me pull together. So your stepmother accessed your account without your consent and used the money for personal expenses? The officer summarized, his pen poised over the form. Yes, I said, my voice steady. She used it to pay for a party. I had no idea until after the fact. He nodded, jotting down notes. This falls under unauthorized use of funds, given the circumstances. We'll open a case and follow up with your parents. You'll want to let your lawyer know so she can coordinate on her end. As I left the station, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. For once, I wasn't letting them get away with it. The fallout began 2 days later when Maria called me, her voice tight with anger. What the hell is this? She demanded. The police just showed up asking about your precious savings. It's exactly what it looks like, I said calmly. You stole from me, so now you're dealing with the consequences. Stole, she scoffed. Don't be ridiculous, Juliana. We're family. That money was for all of us. No, it wasn't, I shot back. It was for me. Dad left it for me, and you had no right to touch it, Greg chimed in from the background, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're taking this seriously. What are you going to do? Take us to court if I have to. I said you brought this on yourselves. Maria let out a bitter laugh. You're being dramatic, do you? Really think this is going to get you anywhere? We'll see, I replied before hanging up. Meanwhile, Chloe was working behind the scenes to prepare for the next step. She'd already sent a formal demand letter to Maria and Greg, outlining the amount they owed and giving them a deadline to repay it as expected. They ignored it. They're doubling down, Chloe said during one of our meetings, which is exactly what we want. The more resistant they are, the worse it'll look for them. If this goes to court, and if they refuse altogether, I asked, then we escalate, she said simply. But don't worry, you're in a strong position between the police report, the bank records, and your father's will. We've got more than enough to back up your case. Her confidence bolstered mine for the first time in years. I felt like I had the upper hand. Maria and Greg had always treated me like I was powerless. But now I was proving that I wasn't. The final straw came when Greg posted a smug photo from their anniversary party on social media, complete with a caption thanking their friends and family for making the night so special. The image of him raising a champagne glass standing next to Maria in her rented designer dress made my blood boil. They were still revving in their victory, blissfully unaware of what was coming next. Enjoy it while it lasts, I muttered to myself, saving the photo as evidence. When I showed it to Chloe later that day, she shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. They're making this way too easy, she said. Let's make sure that champagne toast is won. They'll never forget. It was a week later when the fallout finally came to a head. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping coffee. When my phone buzzed, it was Chloe. They've been served, she said, her voice crisped with satisfaction. The demand letter is now officially part of the case file, and the police are following up with a formal notice of investigation. I leaned back feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. How do you think they'll react? Oh, they'll panic, Chloe said. And when people panic, they either double down or crumble, either way. We win sure enough, Maria called me later that day, her tone frantic and defensive. Juliana, what are you doing? She demanded. You're really going through with this. You'd put your own family through the legal system over a little misunderstanding. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Maria, you stole from me, and if you thought I'd just let it slide, you were wrong. We didn't steal, she shouted. We bored. It was for the party. You should be proud. We could celebrate as a family. I couldn't help but laugh. the sound bitter and sharp. Celebrate, you mean? Flaunt my money in front of your friends while I'm stuck scrambling to rebuild my savings? No, Maria, that's not family, that's selfishness. Greg grabbed the phone from her, his voice oozing with condescension. You're blowing this out of proportion, kiddo. Nobody's going to side with you on this. We're your parents. We've sacrificed for you. Don't you think you owe us a little gratitude? Gratitude? My voice cracked, anger bubbling to the surface for what? For taking what wasn't yours, for mocking me when I asked you to pay me back. No, Greg, the only thing I owe you is accountability, and trust me, you're about to get it. That evening, the police knocked on their door. Chloe had warned me not to expect fireworks. It wasn't an arrest, just formal inquiry, but I couldn't help imagining their faces as the officers explained the seriousness of the situation. Sure enough, Maria called me again, this time with a completely different tone. Juliana, please, she said, her voice shaking. You didn't need to bring the police into this. We can talk about it, figure something out. We tried talking, I reminded her. You laughed in my face and told me to get over it. Now it's out of my hands, her voice cracked. This could ruin us. Do you really want to do that to your own mother? The irony of her words hit me like a slap. Your own mother, as if she hadn't already ruined the trust between us, as if her actions didn't scream that she cared more about appearances than about me. I didn't do this to you, I said quietly. You did it to yourself. A week later, we were sitting across from each other at a mediation table. Chloe sat by my side, her presence steady and reassuring, while Maria and Greg fidgeted in their chairs. They looked different now, less smug, more uncertain. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. The mediator, a calm, middle-aged man with glasses, cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the unauthorized use of Juliana's savings account and determine an appropriate resolution. Juliana, would you like to begin? I nodded, my voice steady as I laid out the facts that money was meant for my down payment on a house I spent years saving it. Maria and Greg emptied the account without my knowledge and used it to pay for a party. When I asked them to pay me back, they refused and mocked me. I'm here to get what's mine, Maria tried to interrupt, but the mediator held up a hand. You'll have your turn, Mrs. Grant. She sank back in her chair, her face tight with anger, when it was her turn to speak. Maria's voice was shaky but defensive. We didn't mean any harm. We thought it was better for the family to celebrate Juliana's young. She has time to save more. We didn't realize she'd take it this far. You didn't realize, Chloe cut in, her voice sharp. You drained her account without permission and then dismissed her concerns. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. Greg opened his mouth to argue, but one look from the mediator silenced him. Latoon, stick to the facts, the mediator said. Based on the evidence, it's clear the funds were intended for Juliana's use, Mrs. Grant. Mr. Grant, you have two options. Repay the full amount immediately or face a civil suit potentially accompanied by criminal charges. Maria's face turned red, her composure cracking. We don't have that kind of money lying around, she snapped. We spent it on the party. Then you'll need to figure out a way to repay her, the mediator said firmly. Otherwise, we proceed with legal action. For a moment, there was silence. Then Greg leaned forward, his voice low. What if we agree to a payment plan? Chloe raised an eyebrow. That's a start, she said, but Juliana has the final say. I looked at them, seeing not the untouchable figures of authority they'd always tried to be, but two flawed, selfish people scrambling to avoid the consequences of their actions. A payment plan is fine, I said finally, but I want it in writing, and if you miss even one payment, the deal's off, they nodded reluctantly. Their bravado completely gone as we left the mediation room. Chloe put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, she said. They won't forget this, neither would I. The mediation agreement was signed that same day, and as I walked out of the building, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though. Getting it back was a relief. It was about standing up for myself. For years, I'd let Maria and Greg take advantage of me, convincing myself that it was easier to stay silent. But not this time. This time I'd made them face the consequences, and they couldn't wriggle out of it. Chloe met me at the door holding a copy of the agreement. They'll be making monthly payments directly into your account, she said, giving me a proud smile. If they so much as miss one, we're ready to file a lawsuit. Thanks for everything, Chloe. I said I couldn't have done this without you. You did the hard part, she replied. I just made sure the system worked for you. The first payment came through a week later, and while it wasn't the full amount, Seeing even a fraction of my savings back in my account was like a balm for my anger. Elena came over that evening to celebrate, bringing takeout and a bottle of wine, to never letting anyone walk all over you again, she said, raising her glass to finally standing up for myself, I replied, clinking mine against hers as we talked. I realized how much had changed in the past few weeks. For so long, I'd put Maria and Greg's needs ahead of my own, convincing myself that family obligations outweighed my feelings. But this experience had shown me that boundaries weren't just important, they were necessary. If I didn't protect my own interests, no one else would. Maria called a few days later, her tone hesitant and unusually subdued. Juliana, I wanted to check in, she said, as if we hadn't just been through a legal battle. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before replying. Is this about the payments? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. No, she said quickly. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I didn't believe her for a second. She wasn't calling out of concern. She was calling because she did not know how to handle the new dynamic between us. For the first time, she couldn't guilt or manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. I'm doing fine, I said, and I expect the next payment on time. There was a pause, and then she sighed. We're family, Juliana. I hope one day you can forgive us. I didn't respond to that. Forgiveness was a long way off, and it wasn't something she could demand just because it suited her. I have to go, I said, ending the call before she could say anything else. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild. Not just my savings, but my sense of self. I adjusted my budget, picked up a few extra shifts, and focused on the future. The dream of buying my own home was still alive, and while Maria and Greg's pay payments weren't enough to cover everything, they were a start. Every time a payment hit my account, it felt like a small victory, a reminder that I had taken control of my life. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about proving to myself that I was stronger than the people who had tried to take advantage of me. And I was months later, as I scrolled through real estate listings, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. The savings were growing steadily, partly from my own hard work, partly from Maria and Greg's payments, while the process was slower than I'd planned. The goal of buying my own home was back within reach. I smiled as I bookmarked a listing for a small but charming house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, or at least it would be soon, and this time, no one would take it away from me. Maria and Greg continued their payments, though not without the occasional grumble. They tried to negotiate for lower amounts, citing financial strain, but Chloe had shut them down each time the terms were clear, and any deviation would result in immediate legal action. They had no choice but to comply. I didn't hear from them often, which was fine by me. When Maria did call, it was usually under the guise of checking in, though her real motive was always clear. We've learned our lesson, she said during one call. Her voice strained. I hope we can move past this someday. I didn't bother sugarcoating my response. Moving past this starts with you taking responsibility, Maria, and that means finishing what you started. There was silence on the other end before she muttered a curt goodbye. I hung up feeling no guilt. For the first time, I wasn't bending over backward to make someone else feel better at my expense. It was freeing. Elena and I celebrated my progress one evening over dinner as we clinked glasses. She said, I've never seen you like this, so confident. It looks good on you, thanks, I said, smiling. I guess I finally realized that standing up for myself doesn't make me a bad person, it just makes me me. And you are pretty awesome, she said with a wink. We laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The betrayal, the anger, the fight, it had all been worth it, not just to reclaim my savings, but to reclaim my self-respect. A few weeks later, I drove by the house I'd bookmarked. I parked across the street, imagining myself inside, filling it with my things, my life, my future. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything I'd worked for and everything I'd overcome. As I sat there, I thought about my dad. He'd worked so hard to provide for me, to make sure I had a foundation to build on. Maria and Greg had tried to take that from me, but they hadn't succeeded. I knew he'd be proud, not just of the house I'd soon own, but of the strength I'd found in myself. I took a deep breath and smiled. This was my life, and it was finally mine to build.